Patrick Henningsen talks on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back to the program. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host, live and direct with TNT. Today's News Talk. We're still in the first hour here. Lucky we're joined by independent researcher, journalist Freddie Ponton, based in France. Now, Freddie, on the issue of NATO, Vladimir Zelensky. Looks like, it appears anyway, we'll bring this story up there. This appeared in the Telegraph, and it was serialized in a number of other media outlets. We'll bring this up on screen. And what is the problem here with Ukraine? Apparently, it looks like, actually, that's not the right slide. We want Vladimir Zelensky. There he is. Ukraine to hold its NATO membership. Okay, it's going to be put on hold because they're just too corrupt. That's what U.S. officials are saying. Sources say, talking here on this story. So this is, it looks like anyway, another potential snub for Ukraine. One of many, one a long line of snubs that keep kicking the can down the road. I really don't think there's anybody that seriously consider Ukraine will be in NATO, despite how many times Tony Blinken is basically going to repeat this talking point, Freddie. It looks like a non-starter, but this looks like also really putting Ukraine in a bad position politically. Who knows what's coming down the pipeline? Could be some kind of negotiation or some settlement with Russia on this issue. What happens to Zelensky? What are you reading in this story, Freddie?
And if you look since 2014, the topic of anti-corruption with the Anti-Corruption Bureau has been, a major topic in Ukraine. I think it's not a brainer, and it's not a real kind of a, surprise to learn that NATO is too corrupt. I think this is nothing new. Everybody knows that. Anybody that's looked into Ukraine for a long period of time will know that. The question is, really, with this report from the Telegraph, is what is happening here? What are they trying to tell you? What is the message behind using this kind of a rhetoric about Ukraine being too corrupt, to get into NATO? Literally a week or 6 days away from the major NATO summit in Washington, D.C., So I think there's something in there that really feels like some kind of a intelligence inputs as far as describing perhaps the beginning of the end for Vladimir Zelensky, and preparing the masses to understand that we are moving to a new chapter in this war, and that, of course, will be influenced by the various results for elections, whether it's in the UK or whether it's in France and of course in the United States. So all that is going to influence a lot of the moves and NATO will undertake over the next 6 months. And I think that when we see pretty much the various reasons, and there are many that explain why this government is not functioning properly, and why perhaps, there were so many people profiting from this war inside Ukraine, because a lot of money was brought into Ukraine by Western taxpayers, if you will, with very, very little traceability. And that has offered basically the oligarch, people in high-level places in the government to take advantage of that. And we saw that at a very early stage with Zelensky, but also we saw Zelensky basically forcing people to resign because of major corruption cases, which basically kind of casted a poor light, a very bad light on his government. So although we can see Zelensky is trying to send a signal saying, look, I'm firing these guys and I'm getting rid of this one, but even if it's a signal to his own government, he cannot change something that is cultural rather than just symptomatic. It's really cultural, and it's across the board. And perhaps some say that Vladimir Zelensky is the most corrupt of them all. So it's difficult to get lesson from someone that many suspect of being extremely corrupted. And if you look in his government and the example of corruptions, from Kirilo Timoshenko, the president deputy head office, which was fired, but he was basically working with Zelensky on his election campaign, and he promised to tackle corruption. That was very central in his program. And then you find that same person, under investigation for having an extra luxurious lifestyle, with cars that were so much money that he could not afford with a very modest salary, and someone that is also involved with embezzlements of 5.7 million, linked with the southern Zaporizhia region, which involves Zelensky as well. So within the governments, we have people that are corrupted, that are behind Zelensky, behind the election campaign of Zelensky's, and you find them further down the line involved in these cases. And there are many examples like that, those that have enriched themselves with the food program for the armies, those that have enriched themselves with many procurement schemes within Ukraine that have allowed them to be extremely rich, and send their daughters abroad, buy houses. And there's countless examples of that. And I think it's really hard to sell on the international stage that Ukraine is a democracy that is exemplary, and that's something we can rely upon as an honest partner. As I don't think that is possible. Maybe in the future, but right now, as a country as it is, I'm sure many NATO members have a lot of kind of second thought about offering Ukraine or supporting a membership of Ukraine in NATO.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, if you think about it, this is a kind of a flimsy throwaway excuse, because, when you talk about Ukraine and corruption, the two go hand in hand. It's like, peanut butter and jelly, and it's just like night and day. Of course, Ukraine is corrupt. There's no question about it. Why would they bring such an excuse up now after all this? It looks like they're just kind of loading on preconditions. So things like, well, we need to clean up the corruption issue first. It's already been like 8 years since the U.S. have set up, NABU and SAPO and all these anti-corruption organizations that the U.S. itself is run out of the U.S. Embassy, basically, in Kiev. And probably more likely, these are agencies to protect corrupt people that the United States likes in Ukraine, and to basically do anybody else. So I think they're just trying to basically put impossible preconditions on this situation in order to not make any real decisions. But what's interesting here is, if it's seen as a total shambles, a total failure, if they get rid of Zelensky, then that's kind of an excuse to sort of clean the decks, clean the slate. And you see this with the Western politicians. Everybody who owns this, like Joe Biden, he's on the way out. Clearly, Macron, he's an owner of this from the beginning. He's on the way out. Olaf Scholz, he's on the way out. So everybody that's really deeply has been attached themselves to Ukraine is basically on the way out. And I think this is a way. One of our guests said this, Freddie, last week, Ibrahim Majid from Beirut. He says, America is really good at losing. When they decide it's time to get out, they're very, very good and calculated in how they get out so that they look good and preserve their interests while the whole thing collapses, basically. They're really good at this, the United States.
Yeah, definitely Zelensky, there is an exit strategy as far as Zelensky is concerned. Now, the timing is what gives you the clue. Now, you're coming very close, as I said, to this NATO summit where big decisions are going to be made. As far as the next stage in this war, because it's quite clear that NATO cannot afford any longer. I don't think financially, I don't think even militarily speaking, NATO is equipped to entertain an open war, an open conflict directly with Russia. So that's a cul-de-sac, if you will. So they're going to have to talk about how do we walk out of this without too much damage. So it's about damage control, risk mitigations, and perhaps also about liability. Because let's not forget that Zelensky has been very much aware of all the shenanigans, whether it's CIA or MI6, he's been very much aware of what's going on in the countries. And doesn't matter if it's irregular warfare or if it's conventional warfare, it doesn't matter. He knows a lot, and he could easily become a liability because he's not a very stable person. He's stable until the money keeps on flowing, but the day the money stops flowing his way, that might be someone they're going to have to watch, because might be someone that's going to say, look, if you want to talk about negotiations for peace, with the Russians, you drag me into this war. I've lost, hundreds of thousands of people in this war. I cannot go and stand in front of my people and tell them, okay, now let's negotiate after, 500,000 people have died. Could have done that when we could have done that literally, a few weeks after the start of this conflict. So I'm looking at Vladimir Zelensky more becoming a liability, which needs to be taken care of, that needs to be accompanied towards the exit, making sure that he's not going to create any problem, or he's not going to be some kind of obstacle for what NATO will decide as a next step. So that's the way I look at it, but it's definitely a move towards expressing the departure of Zelensky as the leader of Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. And I think, just throwing doubt on NATO membership with Ukraine, that's obviously that's kind of a soft bone to throw Moscow in advance of any kind of potential, multilateral negotiations, which a lot of people are agreeing, even some Ukrainians, Yermak, and others, chief of staff of Zelensky, have said that we need to talk to Russia at this point. So I think the writing's on the wall. Their army, their military is collapsing. They're literally having to kidnap men off the street to throw them onto the front line. I mean, anytime you get to this point, this is literally the final days of whatever the sort of, effort, whatever they're stuck in there. I think people are starting to admit it. They tried. Washington, everybody else, NATO members, they tried. They thought they could make this work. They thought they could wear down the Russians. A huge miscalculation. Finally, after 2.5 years, they realize it's a no-goer, and they're looking for a way to back out of this gracefully, but still maintain this incredible remilitarization of Europe. Because let's face it, they've made huge strides in remilitarizing Europe. Look at Finland and Sweden. How many 24 bases going in there? They've got a new, basically, Iron Curtain that's been dropped along the Polish border, right down to Romania. So that's not going away, Freddie. You've got the remilitarization of Europe, kind of a reboot of where the Cold War was, but a little more intense, in fact, when you think about it. So they have that locked in. They've got that locked in.
It's not getting a lot of traction. If you look at a report from the European Council on Foreign Relations, they really have a good survey of the overall pulse on European big topics, and one of them being basically spending 2.5% of your budget on defense, and they've asked the European people, if this is something they support, and this is not getting any tractions. So it doesn't matter what the States wants as far as part of their political or their foreign policies. That's one thing. But if you really ask the European people, because you can have all the foreign policies in the world, if it's not maintained, supported by the people, it's going to have a shelf time, if you will, that's going to expire, and it's going to expire sooner than later, if you will. So the European people are not interested in conflict, more war, more spendings towards war. That's anyone that tells you that is telling you nonsense, because it's not there. It's not in Europe. It's not in France. It's not in Germany. It's not in Holland. It's not in major countries. Nobody wants to spend more money on defense. People want to go back to their domestic issues and trying to address their problem, because they've remained unaddressed since COVID-19. And we've been from one crisis to the next, addressing other things than our own problem. And I think this is the time to return to address this problem. And anything that has to do with the countries which we're not attached to, they're not European, they're not part of the European Union, they're not the NATO members, we have no business in going and spending more money. So we don't trust Ursula von der Leyen. I think her popularity in Europe is at the lowest it's ever been. And literally entrusting her with billions every month to send to Ukraine seems more like a racketeering business than anything else, especially in a country that is so corrupt like Ukraine. So we want to put an end to that. And as I say, if France move towards the national rally with a majority, then I think we'll certainly going to see some of these movements of money towards Ukraine stopping, and then certainly some arms movements as well stopping, because I don't think the national rally is going to support this kind of activity for much longer, because it just doesn't get any traction with the people in France. So yes, I think Zelensky has become irrelevant. There's no doubt. I think he's pretty much considered by many states as illegitimate. And this is where it's going to go.
False flag in Europe, hot, medium, or cold? Quick, Freddie. Hot, medium, or cold? False flag alert. What do you think? Hot, medium, or cold?
Well, yeah, you're going to get some of that for sure. Maintaining a level of fear is important. So the Olympic Games are coming, all these big events are coming. Perfect platform to scare people away.
We've got to keep an eye on that. We've got to keep a close eye on that one. Freddie Ponton, thank you very much for joining us on TNT this week.
It's my pleasure.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Freddie Ponton. Follow him on X, Twitter, at LFC News Media. Listen, we're going to take a break. There are news headlines coming up when we get back to the United States. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Stay with us.